In April of 1995, a very unusual crime took place in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. At first, it looked like a normal bank robbery. A man walked into a bank during the afternoon, approached the counter, and handed a note to the teller. The note demanded money. The man did not wear a mask. He did not try to hide his face. In fact, he seemed completely calm and confident. The bank employees were shocked. Most criminals try to hide their identity during a robbery. But this man did the opposite. He stood directly in front of security cameras with his face clearly visible. After receiving the money, he calmly walked out of the bank and disappeared. But what happened next made the situation even more strange. Because only a few hours later, police officers had already found the suspect. They arrested him without difficulty. When officers confronted him, the man looked completely confused. He could not understand how the police had identified him so quickly. The suspect's name was McArthur Wheeler. He was a 44-year-old man living in Pittsburgh. When officers told him that his face had been clearly captured on the bank's security cameras, Wheeler responded with something that shocked everyone in the room. He said, "But I wore the juice." The officers had no idea what he meant. "What juice?" they asked. Wheeler explained that before committing the robbery, he had covered his face with lemon juice. He believed that lemon juice would make his face invisible to security cameras. He was completely serious. He truly believed that the cameras would not be able to see him. To Wheeler, the plan had seemed perfect. But of course, it had not worked at all. The security cameras had recorded his face clearly. And that is why the police were able to identify him so quickly. Investigators later learned that Wheeler had robbed 2 banks on the same day. Both robberies had been captured on camera. And in both cases, Wheeler had walked into the banks without any disguise. No mask. No sunglasses. Nothing to hide his identity. The police simply reviewed the footage and quickly located him. For officers, the situation was both surprising and confusing. Why would someone believe that lemon juice could make them invisible to cameras? The answer turned out to be connected to a strange misunderstanding about chemistry. Lemon juice has sometimes been used as invisible ink. When lemon juice is used to write on paper, the writing is not visible until the paper is heated. Some people believe that this chemical property can somehow hide writing. But McArthur Wheeler misunderstood this idea completely. Somehow, he believed that lemon juice could also hide his face from cameras. According to reports, Wheeler had even tested his idea before committing the robbery. He applied lemon juice to his face and then tried taking a photo with a camera. But something went wrong with his test. The photo apparently did not show his face clearly. This convinced him that his plan worked. But investigators believe the real explanation was much simpler. Wheeler likely did not position the camera correctly when taking the picture. As a result, the photo did not capture his face. Instead of realizing the mistake, he concluded that the lemon juice had worked. This misunderstanding gave him the confidence to carry out the robbery. When Wheeler appeared in court later, the story quickly attracted attention. It was such a strange mistake that psychologists began studying the case. One psychologist in particular, David Dunning, became fascinated by Wheeler's behavior. Dunning was a professor at Cornell University who studied human judgment and decision-making. When he heard about the case, he began asking an important question. How could someone be so confident about something that was obviously wrong? Together with another researcher, Justin Kruger, Dunning conducted a series of experiments. They wanted to understand how people evaluate their own knowledge and abilities. The results of their research revealed something very interesting. Many people who lack knowledge or skill in a certain area often believe they are more competent than they actually are. At the same time, people who are highly skilled sometimes underestimate their own abilities. This psychological pattern later became known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The case of McArthur Wheeler became one of the most famous examples used to explain this idea. Wheeler had been extremely confident in his plan. But that confidence was based on a misunderstanding. Because he lacked knowledge about how cameras work, he could not recognize how flawed his plan actually was. The robbery itself ended quickly. Wheeler was arrested and later sentenced to prison. But the story continued to spread. News organizations reported the bizarre details. People around the world found the story both unbelievable and strangely humorous. A man had robbed a bank without wearing a mask because he believed lemon juice would make him invisible. Today, the story of McArthur Wheeler is still discussed in psychology classes. It is used as an example of how overconfidence can sometimes lead people to make serious mistakes. But at the time, for the police officers who arrested him, the situation was simply one of the strangest criminal cases they had ever seen. And as investigators continued examining the case, even more surprising details about Wheeler's thinking and planning began to emerge. After McArthur Wheeler was arrested, the strange story of the lemon juice robber quickly began spreading throughout Pittsburgh. For the police officers involved in the case, it was one of the most unusual arrests they had ever experienced. Bank robberies were not uncommon. But a robber who believed lemon juice could make him invisible to security cameras was something entirely different. When officers first questioned Wheeler at the police station, they expected him to eventually admit that the story about the lemon juice had been a joke. But that never happened. Wheeler continued insisting that his plan should have worked. He seemed genuinely confused. He could not understand how the cameras had captured his face. Investigators explained to him that security cameras simply record whatever is in front of them. They do not work like invisible ink. They do not react to lemon juice. But Wheeler remained puzzled. To him, the idea had seemed logical. At some point before committing the robbery, Wheeler had apparently learned that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink. When lemon juice is applied to paper and allowed to dry, the writing becomes difficult to see. However, when heat is applied to the paper, the hidden writing becomes visible. This trick has been known for centuries and has even been used in secret messages. But Wheeler misunderstood how the process worked. Instead of realizing that lemon juice only affects certain chemical reactions on paper, he somehow believed that it could also hide objects from cameras. According to reports, Wheeler even performed a test before committing the robbery. He applied lemon juice to his face and attempted to take a photograph of himself. When the image did not appear as he expected, he assumed that the lemon juice had successfully made him invisible. Investigators later believed the explanation was far simpler. Wheeler likely did not position the camera correctly when taking the photo. Perhaps he accidentally pointed the camera away from his face. Or maybe the lighting was poor. Whatever the reason, the photo did not clearly show him. Instead of realizing the mistake, Wheeler interpreted the result as proof that his plan would work. That mistake gave him the confidence to commit not just one robbery, but two. On the day of the crime, Wheeler entered two different banks in Pittsburgh. In both cases, he walked directly up to the counter and demanded money. He did not attempt to hide his identity. He did not cover his face. He behaved as though the cameras could not see him. Bank employees later described him as calm and almost relaxed. He did not seem nervous. In fact, his behavior suggested that he believed he was completely protected from being identified. The security cameras inside the banks captured everything. His face. His clothing. Even the way he moved. Once police obtained the footage, identifying him was extremely easy. Officers distributed the images to local police units and investigators. Within hours, someone recognized him. Police quickly located Wheeler and arrested him. For investigators, the case became both a criminal investigation and a puzzle. They wanted to understand how someone could make such a strange mistake. During questioning, Wheeler never tried to deny the robberies. Instead, he seemed more interested in understanding why his plan had failed. When officers told him that the cameras had recorded his face clearly, Wheeler reportedly responded with the now famous words, "But I wore the juice." The statement became one of the most famous quotes associated with the case. Eventually, Wheeler was charged with robbery and appeared in court. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Security footage clearly showed his face. Bank employees identified him as the man who had demanded money, and the timeline of events connected him directly to the crimes. During the trial process, the strange details of the case began attracting attention outside the courtroom. Local news stations reported the bizarre explanation involving lemon juice. Soon the story spread to newspapers across the country. People found it both shocking and strangely amusing. How could someone believe such a thing? But for psychologists studying human behavior, the case was extremely interesting. One of the researchers who became fascinated by the story was David Dunning, a psychology professor at Cornell University. When Dunning heard about Wheeler's case, he began thinking about an important question. Why do some people feel extremely confident about ideas that are completely wrong? To explore this question, Dunning partnered with another psychologist named Justin Kruger. Together, they began conducting experiments to study how people evaluate their own abilities. In one experiment, participants were asked to complete tasks involving logic, grammar, and humor. After completing the tasks, the participants were asked to estimate how well they had performed compared to others. The results were surprising. Many participants who performed poorly believed they had done very well. At the same time, participants who performed strongly often underestimated their own performance. The researchers discovered a pattern. People with lower levels of knowledge or skill in a particular area often lack the ability to recognize their own mistakes. Because they do not fully understand the subject, they also cannot accurately judge their own performance. This leads them to feel more confident than they should. Meanwhile, people who are highly skilled often assume that tasks are easier for others than they actually are. This causes them to underestimate their own abilities. The researchers eventually published their findings in a scientific paper. The phenomenon became known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. McArthur Wheeler's story became one of the most famous real-world examples used to illustrate this psychological concept. Wheeler had been extremely confident in his plan. But that confidence was based on a misunderstanding of how cameras and chemistry work. Because he lacked knowledge in those areas, he could not recognize how flawed his plan actually was. For the public, the story remained both fascinating and humorous. It seemed unbelievable that someone could commit such a crime based on such a strange idea. But psychologists pointed out that the underlying lesson was very important. Human beings often overestimate their own knowledge. Sometimes we believe we understand something when we actually do not. And when confidence is not supported by real knowledge, mistakes can happen. In Wheeler's case, that mistake led directly to his arrest. Eventually, Wheeler was convicted of robbery and sentenced to prison. The case faded from the headlines, but the story never disappeared completely. Over the years, it has been retold in books, psychology lectures, and discussions about human behavior. Today, the phrase Dunning-Kruger effect is widely used to describe situations where people overestimate their abilities. And the strange bank robbery carried out by McArthur Wheeler remains one of the most famous examples of how overconfidence can sometimes lead to incredibly unexpected consequences. After the trial of McArthur Wheeler concluded, the strange story of the lemon juice robber continued spreading far beyond the city of Pittsburgh. At first, it had simply been a local crime story. But as newspapers and television stations reported the details, the case quickly became famous across the United States. People could not believe what they were hearing. A man had robbed 2 banks in broad daylight. He had made no effort to hide his face. And when he was arrested, he explained that he believed lemon juice had made him invisible to security cameras. For many people, the story sounded almost like a joke. But for psychologists and researchers studying human behavior, the case revealed something much deeper. It showed how confidence and knowledge do not always develop together. Sometimes, people who understand the least about a subject can feel the most confident about it. This idea became the foundation of what is now known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. After studying the case of McArthur Wheeler and conducting their experiments, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger published their research in 1999. Their findings were surprising but very important. They discovered that people who perform poorly on certain tasks often believe they have performed very well. At the same time, People who perform very well often underestimate their abilities. In simple terms, the people who know the least are often the most confident. And the people who know the most sometimes doubt themselves. This psychological pattern appears in many areas of life. For example, someone who knows very little about science might feel extremely confident arguing about complex scientific topics. Meanwhile, experienced scientists often recognize how much there is still to learn. They understand the limits of their knowledge. The story of McArthur Wheeler became one of the most famous real-life examples used to explain this idea. Wheeler had been completely confident in his plan. He believed that lemon juice would hide his face from cameras. Because he did not fully understand how cameras work, he could not see the flaw in his thinking. His lack of knowledge prevented him from recognizing his own mistake. For psychologists, this case provided a powerful illustration of how human thinking can sometimes lead people in the wrong direction. But beyond the psychological research, Wheeler's story also became part of popular culture. Over the years, the case has appeared in books, documentaries, and online discussions about unusual crimes. It is often included in lists of the strangest criminal mistakes ever recorded. The image of a bank robber confidently walking into a bank without a mask because he believed lemon juice would protect him is something people find difficult to forget. Yet behind the humor of the story lies a serious lesson. Confidence alone does not guarantee success. Without knowledge, confidence can actually lead people to make dangerous decisions. In Wheeler's case, that decision resulted in his arrest and imprisonment. After his conviction, McArthur Wheeler largely disappeared from public attention. Unlike some criminals who become famous through media coverage, Wheeler did not give interviews or attempt to defend his actions publicly. Very little information about his later life became widely known. But the story he left behind continued to be discussed by psychologists and educators. In classrooms around the world, students studying psychology often hear about the Dunning-Kruger effect. And many of those lessons begin with the strange story of a man who believed lemon juice could make him invisible. The lesson is simple but powerful. People often believe they understand something better than they actually do. When someone has limited knowledge about a topic, they may not even realize how much they do not know. This lack of awareness can create a false sense of confidence. Experts sometimes describe this as a kind of cognitive blind spot. When someone lacks the knowledge needed to perform a task correctly, they may also lack the knowledge needed to recognize their own mistakes. As a result, they believe they are doing better than they really are. The opposite can also happen. Highly skilled individuals often recognize the complexity of their field. They understand how many details and possibilities exist. Because of this, they may judge themselves more critically. They may feel less confident even though their abilities are actually much higher. This is why the Dunning-Kruger effect continues to be an important concept in psychology. It helps explain why overconfidence appears in so many areas of life. From business decisions to politics, from sports to everyday conversations, people sometimes express strong opinions about topics they do not fully understand. And in extreme cases, that overconfidence can lead to serious consequences. For McArthur Wheeler, the consequence was immediate. His misunderstanding led directly to his arrest. If he had taken even a moment to question his plan more carefully, he might have realized how impossible it was. Security cameras do not become blind when someone applies lemon juice to their face. But because Wheeler believed his idea was correct, he never stopped to consider the possibility that he might be wrong. In many ways, the story of the lemon juice robber is not just about crime. It is about human thinking. It reminds us that confidence should always be supported by knowledge and understanding. When people are willing to question their assumptions and learn more about the world, they reduce the chances of making serious mistakes. Today, more than 20 years after the robbery, the story of McArthur Wheeler still appears in discussions about psychology, education, and critical thinking. It serves as a memorable example of how the human mind can sometimes lead us astray. And while the case may seem humorous at first glance, its lesson remains important. Believing something strongly does not make it true. Understanding how the world actually works is what truly protects us from mistakes. For McArthur Wheeler, that lesson came too late. But for the millions of people who later heard his story, it became a powerful reminder of the dangers of overconfidence. And it all began with one unusual idea: the belief that lemon juice could make a bank robber invisible.